Hello everyone. We have completed lectures on the basis of disease pathogenesis and some of the basic epidemiological concepts regarding diseases. Now we are going to another unit in the syllabus, and this deals with the public health importance of zoos. So we know that zoo is a very interesting place to visit. We have visited as kids, we have visited as young adults, and now being veterinarian, you have to view the zoos in a different perspective. So it is a very important institution when it comes to the conservation of animals. Now, the original purpose of zoos were to merely displaying the animals that were once, which was found in very far away lands, and those cannot be seen by a common man unless you have a lot of money to travel over the place. So it was mainly a center for amusement and recreation. But over the years, the significance of zoo or zoological collections have increased. Primarily, these centers now function as a center for ex situ conservation of animals. So zoos will attract a lot of visitors. There is a lot of there are a lot of things to learn from a zoo, both from a conservationist point of view, from a amusement point of view, a naturalist point of view. So you have a lot of things to learn from a zoo. But there are many other aspects. Being veterinarians, there is a very good possibility that at least a few of you will be put in charge of a zoo and to ensure the welfare of the animals in the collection, as well as the crew that are operating, and also the visitors of the zoo. So being a veterinarian, it is very important that you should be aware of the public health risks and concerns when it comes to operating a zoo, as well as the importance of hygiene and biosecurity when it comes to a zoo. So as I told you, it is not merely a hub for public recreation anymore. Nowadays, zoo has 4 major aims to fulfill. Those are education of the public, recreation, research regarding various aspects, like regarding captive reproduction. It could be regarding the health of the animal, welfare of the animal, welfare of the visitors. So a lot of research happens, and of course there is an element of conservation, where many of the large zoos or important zoos may be involved in captive breeding programs and releasing these bred animals into the wild, and thereby creating or conserving the precious wildlife of a country. So the current statistics says that there is approximately 700 million visitors in the registered or accredited zoos worldwide. So not all zoos may be accredited, but when you take the accredited zoos alone or registered zoos alone, there is about 700 million visitors globally. And more animals are being introduced into the zoos because of the requirement or the necessity for conservation. Now, the flip side of this is that you should know that out of all the infectious disease known to man, 60% of these are zoonotic in nature. That means they have, or these diseases usually are transmitted from an animal to a man, or occasionally from a man to other animals. And there are certain certain class of infectious diseases called as emerging infectious disease, that is diseases that are not known before, but they are appear and seems to spread across the world, and those are known as emerging infectious diseases. And 70% of these emerging infections originate from a wild animal, or the 70% of such emerging infectious diseases have wildlife as a reservoir host, and 75% of these infections are zoonotic in nature. So there lies the importance of a veterinarian when it comes to operating and running a zoo. So when you are working in a zoo, you should always keep this thing in a zoo. It could be a zoo, it could be a wildlife, you could be a wildlife veterinarian, you could be operating a zoo. So this important factor should always be kept in mind. And thus veterinarians or the wildlife or zoo veterinarians and his crews are always at a constant risk of such exposures. Now let us see what are zoonoses. Zoonoses can be highly fatal as in rabies, or it could be self-limiting. Salmonella, Cryptosporidium, Giardia species could be self-limiting, and some can be really serious infections like toxoplasmosis, Japanese encephalitis that can cause abortions and encephalitis. Then some diseases like Ebola or Marburg disease can result in a very large amount of fatality, or they have a high mortality. Then many of these diseases like Casanor forest disease or Ebola hemorrhagic fever could be really risky to our highly threatened animals also. Thus, diseases can of course cause a great loss to humanity, and also it can be a potent threat to the biodiversity as well. When it comes to zoonosis, we have prioritized the list that is some zoonoses are more important when it comes to the economics involved or the humanity, the risk to humans involved, etc. And priority zoonoses include leptospirosis, anthrax, bovine TB, then Japanese encephalitis, cysticercosis, rickettsiosis, salmonellosis, etc. And many of these priority zoonoses, it is very important to understand that many of these priority zoonoses has been reported from zoos as well. So how can we prevent the spread of such zoonoses? It is very important that you should know how a zoonosis occurs and what is the mode of transmission and the mode of entry of the disease. And the mode of entry can be a single point, as in trichinellosis, where you have to ingest the meat, or it can be there can be multiple points of entry, as in tularemia, where you can get the infection from, or you or the animal can get the infection from contact, food, water, aerosol, etc. And the disease can be directly transmitted, as in case of case of skin contact, ingestion, inhalation, or it can be indirectly transmitted through a fomite or a vector, or even long distance aerial transmission can happen. Now disease can be anthropozoonotic, that means the disease is transmitted from animal to humans, or zooanthroponotic, that is the disease that is transmitted from human to animal. So in a zoo, it is very important to understand that the disease anthropozoonosis and zooanthroponosis can equally and efficiently be transmitted. Now, what are the factors that affect the spread of such diseases? It can be interaction. It is always the interaction of the epidemiological triad, that is the host, agent, and the environment. Now, the organism may be able to evade the physical, biological, and immunological barriers of the host, as we saw in the previous classes. And there will be certain host-related factors that will make host either susceptible or resistant to infection. In this point, you should understand the peculiarity, or to better elucidate the concept of the ability of host to resist or tolerate a disease. Nowadays you have seen that a lot of diseases have accused bats to be a reservoir host. That means these bats can carry many infections without producing a clinical signs. Why is that so? It is because of the high metabolic rate of a bat. You know that bat is a mammal, but it has the power of flight. Now, for flying, you need to have a very high metabolic rate, which is unusual for other animals. And what happens is that the high metabolic rate means there will be a lot of free radicals being produced as part of the metabolic process. Now there should be an efficient free radical scavenging mechanisms also. So bats have many multiple free radical scavenging mechanisms, including certain interferons such as interferon alpha, and they are they are very important in preventing viral replication inside the cell also. So what happens is that most of the bats have the ability to harbor many viruses, because these viruses will get into the bats cells and tissues and has the ability to multiply, but their reproduction inside the cell is controlled very efficiently compared to other animals because of the presence of these interferon systems. Thus the bats have the ability to harbor a lot of viruses. So they will harbor a lot of viruses, but they appear to be resistant to such infections. But these mechanisms are not present in other incidental hosts like human beings, and when these viruses attack or when these viruses spill over from the reservoir bats to humans, we will not have such resistance, and we will become, or we are naturally, we will be more susceptible to such infection, and that disease can manifest in us. So that is why the host has there are many host related factors that will make the host either susceptible or resistant to a disease. And when you are talking about a zoo, you are talking about multiple collection of animals that are found that are normally geographically separated by a vast distance, are brought close together in a zoo, and there is a good chance that these diseases can be transmitted from a previously disease from one animal to another species where the disease was never known to occur previously. So that is the importance when it comes to the transmission of diseases in a zoological setting. Then of course there will be certain prevailing environmental factors that can either promote or retard the occurrence of the disease. So that can be temperature, the vegetation, rainfall in the area, humidity, altitude, latitude, etc. And of course there will be the probability, the role of vectors when it comes to the significance of environment. So these are the factors that will help in transmission of infections from animal to man, or of course vice versa, or rarely from man to animals also. In addition to this, there is a huge risk for people operating inside the zoo setting, because many a times we see that even though we have a large collection of animals, the disease part is often ignored in a zoo, and many of the personnel operating in a zoo will not be provided with the adequate protective equipments, and that makes the zoo workers extremely susceptible for many of the previously unknown infections. Thus there is lack of protective equipment. Then if they are not well trained with respect to hygiene, especially hand hygiene, when you are operating with animals, that too exotic animals, it is very important that you frequently wash your hands, because there is every chance that you will be carrying a previously unknown disease, and when you are touching or handling the animal or animal product, or even the wheelbarrow that is used to transport food or feed to the animals. Then other points of risk could be the improper disposal of carcass, the dung or urine of the animal, and foodstuffs. Then another peculiar or another important situation is when we people enter into a deep forest area for censuses, surveys. What happens is that or it could be even for wildlife veterinarian entering into a deep forest area for post-mortem examination of animals. What happens is that you are being exposed to a lot of vectors or potential vectors, and you get yourself exposed to, or there is a huge risk of exposure to many of the previously unknown infections. And in a recent in a published study regarding the risk factors or the exposure risk when it comes to veterinarians, Indian wildlife veterinarians and supporting staff, it was seen that only 16.7% of Indian wildlife veterinarians take precaution while handling such extremely dangerous situations. And another curious finding was that only 63% of veterinarians have been vaccinated against rabies. Now, you should understand that India is the leading country where death due to rabies occurs, and wildlife veterinarians are thus at very high risk of contracting rabies. This is one particular picture that has aroused a lot of curiosity in me. This picture was published in the year 2013, and at a first glance, you may not even be able to understand what the picture itself is. This is actually a map, and it's not only a symbol map, but it is also a graphical representation of something. Now, what the author has tried to do here is that he has kept the geographical area of all the land masses in the world as a constant, and the geographical area is plotted proportionally to the incidence of rabies. Now, let us see, let us try to understand the graph. So, this is the whole world, and note this particular large yellow landmass. So, this particular blob is in fact India, and here lies Bangladesh. Here it is Sri Lanka, maybe this is Pakistan. You have the entire African continent here, and the entire North America, or sorry, the entire American continent, both North America and South America here. What do you get from this graph? We can simply, or we can very easily understand the magnitude of rabies death that India contributes to the world. One of the most important zoonosis, and 63% of veterinarians are said to be unvaccinated or have not been vaccinated properly against rabies. So that shows the importance of biosecurity and hygiene when it comes to handling or managing an enclosure for wildlife. So a proper management is essential when it comes to managing a zoo. Okay, what happens? What are the most important problems when it comes to zoo? It can be overcrowding, improper restraint, altered food habit of the animal, and the issues regarding transportation and transportation stress. All these issues can cause an increased stress that can precipitate an overt disease and also create a situation that the disease spread to other animals and persons. Coupled with this, there could be chances of improper handling of clinical samples in the laboratories that are being sent to test. So, how can we, or what are the essentialities of prevention and control of such diseases that originate from the zoos? A wildlife specialist is the man to go. He has to act in accordance with the concept of One Health. And One Health means disease is, or health does not imply man or animal alone. Health is same, or the health of a man or a health of a people lies in the health of the animal, the ecosystem, and the whole of the environment that contains both human and animals and the other factors that contribute to the ecosystem. So a veterinarian or the personnel who is in charge of a zoological enclosure should work under the concept of, or should work with the aim of One Health, and prevention and control of diseases becomes very more important than treating the disease once the disease precipitated. It's very evident from the current situation also. The disease originated in a mixed animal enclosure. We don't know the finer details, but it is very evident that the disease occurred in a mixed animal enclosure, and the lack of attention given to biosecurity has resulted in a pandemic. So a zoo is not different from any of these situations, and thus prevention and control of diseases is essential or more important than treating the disease once disease is precipitated. So let us look at the disease control strategies. So the susceptibility, you know that the susceptibility of disease to a particular disease varies between and within species, of course, and the disease can propagate only when susceptible animals exist in a population. The role of a veterinarian or the personnel in the zoo, the personnel in charge of the zoo, is to make sure that there is the population of susceptible species is held below a critical threshold level, and only that above the threshold level only the disease will propagate. Now this can be achieved by making sure that the animal population that you have is not susceptible to any infection. Now this can be by immunization, can be by treatment of infected animals, or by controlling the number of secondary cases. Secondary cases are those cases that has contracted infection through contact from a primary or an index case. All these factors will help in bringing down the basic reproduction rate of the disease, that is R0 or R0 value or R0 value, to less than 1, and that means the disease is contained and the disease will eventually die out in the population. Now these can be done by translocation of susceptible species, doing a test and slaughter strategy, which is not usually acceptable when it comes to the a wildlife setting, but you may be forced to do. Then selective depopulation may be required, fertility control may be required, especially when you look at the enclosed captive deer population. So these deers do very well in reproducing when they are held in captivity. They don't have a problem of reproductive stress when it comes to captivity. So many a times what you have to do, you may have to, monkeys is another example. So you may have to do a fertility control program so that the number of susceptible animals is below a threshold value. And then of course you have to prevent the exposure of infection to further susceptible animals, so that could include proper burial of the carcass, isolation and treatment of animal. Then the parasite load, of course, is a very big risk factor when it comes to a proper level of immunity. So regular deworming is important. Of course, the importance of quarantine. So when you are bringing in a new animal or a rescued animal from wildlife, you should ensure that you have your zoological collection or your zoo has a adequate quarantine facility. So the animals brought in should be kept isolated and separated from both other animals as well as visitors, kept for at least 21 days, and make sure that there is no overt or covert clinical signs or any of the diseases in the animal, and ensure that the animal has been provided with the food or feed as natural as possible. So it is not possible. It is not easy to give 100% natural food or wildlife what the wildlife gets, but it should mimic so that the welfare of the animal is ensured, and that will reduce the stress of the animal to the in the new environment. Then of course you need to have a regular surveillance and monitoring efforts. When it comes to the environmental control of infection, the landscape, vegetation, etc. can have a major role, especially when it comes to vector population and formation of nidus in the environment. You have to be very careful in disposal of the dung, urine, maybe the fetal membranes and other things, the food waste and all should be very carefully and properly disposed. It can be done by composting, it can be done by incineration, uh, depending upon the deep burial, depending upon the situation. But otherwise, if improperly disposed, what can happen is that they will become a focus from where the disease originates, or that is known as a nidus. So it can be a source of spores, ova, oocyst, for further spread of the disease, and that can further result in public health concerns. And so your aim should be to manipulate the environment in such a way that it is unfavorable for the host. So it can so those the entire efforts like disinfection, burial of carcass, drainage, avoid proper drainage, or ensuring a proper drainage, all these things contributes to the environmental hygiene and sanitation as a part of the zoo biosecurity. So you should undertake regular disinfection of, or make sure that there is regular disinfection of cages, closures, and especially the wheelbarrows that are used to transport the clothing of the personals. So it should be made sure that all these things are regularly disinfected, and the floor space should be adequate. Overcrowding, as you know, is a major cause for transmissions by contact and aerosol. Then the zoo will have usually has vegetation and water bodies. So this can be a very important place for, or a breeding ground for vectors. So what you will do? You have to do an integrated. You have to ensure that there is an integrated pest management strategy inside your zoo. There is a proper drainage facility for the zoo. You should make sure that your water bodies has adequate the fishes or other birds that will prey on vectors like mosquitoes or maybe ticks. Then another important thing is that zoos are always in a urban, or usually in an urban, or occasionally in a suburban setting, and the locality will be very suitable for access to stray animals and rodents like rats. Now imagine if a disease happens in a zoo, and the rodents or the stray animals can have an free access into these sick animals. There is a high probability that the disease can be carried by these stray animals, and there will be a spillover from the zoo to the urban wildlife or even human population. So that again is a very grave risk when you are running a zoo in a urban setting. So what you have to do is that you should ensure that the zoo is totally inaccessible to the stray animals in the locality. Now what should the personnel understand? The people working in the zoo should understand. They should have a basic knowledge regarding the epidemiology and prevention of infectious disease. So they should understand the importance of hygiene. They should understand the importance of wearing proper protective clothes. They should understand the importance of avoiding tick and mosquito bites. The veterinarian or the personnel handling the animal should be well versed in physical or chemical restraint of the animal before proceeding for further clinical examination. Then there should be adequate personal protective clothing and other measures, and also cleaning. Then the animals should be regularly screened, vaccinated, and dewormed. It is not only for animals, the staff also should be regularly vaccinated and dewormed, so as to prevent any other, or to prevent the occurrence or transmission of diseases. The lab, if your zoo is equipped with a lab, then the lab, it is essential that the lab follows the standard operating protocols. And above all, there should be a open and transparent knowledge sharing between vets and medical professionals, biologists and conservationists, because that is the crux of One Health. Now visitors are totally a different subject, because there is no need for a visitor to be well versed in epidemiology or the transmission or prevention or even zoonosis. But it is the responsibility of the veterinarian or the zoo authority to ensure that the safety of visitor is ensured. What are the things that can be done? First, you should discourage the visitors from touching the animals or even the cages of the animals. Feeding, if you are allowing feeding, because there are certain zoos which we don't have in India, they are known as petting zoos, where the children or the visiting people are allowed to feed and pet the animals. So they are allowed to do that. So if you are allowing that, you should ensure that the visitor is made aware of the risk involved in feeding these animals. There should be adequate hand washing facilities, and the importance of hand washing, there is no need to explain it further to you under these situations. We are living in a totally new era, or the COVID era or the post-COVID era, where hand washing, the importance of hand washing is never underestimated and or under-explained. So there should be enough hand washing facilities in a zoo. Then another thing is that as a zoo being a recreational sport, there is always a scope for picnic inside a zoo. The people will be bringing in eatables, or there will have to be vending areas where you have to provide food for the visitors, and you should make sure that the food vending area is far away from any of the animal enclosures in order to in order to reduce the risk of transmission. Pets should not be brought into the zoo, because they can come into contact with various diseases. Protective clothing and insect repellents have to be encouraged for zoo visitors also. Another thing is that you have to see, in a zoo there will be a lot of display boards regarding the information regarding the animals and all. That should also incorporate informations regarding zoonosis, emerging infectious diseases, and the risk of transmission of infections from animals and man. So this is not usually kept in a zoo because it can scare away the visitors. But it is very important that the visitors also should be educated regarding the risk of, or the risk or the threat of emerging diseases, and the role that wildlife has to play, or wildlife plays in the emergence of disease. They should be made aware that such infections are not purposely carried or transmitted by animals to humans, but happens when human encroach to the land of the wildlife, that they are forced to transmit, or then only the humans get infected from the wildlife. Biosecurity is the set of precautions taken to minimize the risk of introducing an infectious disease into an animal or a human population. Zoo biosecurity aims to prevent the introduction of infectious disease and contaminants into a zoo animal, prevent the spread of disease from an infected area to an uninfected area. Or area means it can be inside the zoo or outside the zoo. Then prevent the spread of infectious disease from zoo animals to animals outside the zoo, and prevent the spread of infectious disease from animals to human, as well as humans to animals. Now this includes, but it is not limited to, a preventive medicine program, an appropriately constructed, maintained facility, management of stray and pest species, management of drainage, good hygiene, appropriate quarantine of newly arrived sick animals, proper diagnostics, ensuring food, water and other equipments. And what does it mean to have a preventive medicine program? For example, the herbivores should be vaccinated against HS, BQ and FMD twice a year. Feline should be vaccinated against these things: rabies, feline panleukopenia, viral rhinotracheitis, parvovirus, etc. And in addition, there should be care for trypanosomosis or other vector-borne diseases. Then the birds should be vaccinated against Newcastle, preferably by Lassa or F1. And the aim of biosecurity of course, is to keep the zoo animals safe and healthy. The staff must be safe and healthy. The visitors, the safety and health of the visitors. Then minimize the cost associated with the treating of these zoo animals. Then of course, the zoo has to has to be kept running and promoting a good reputation of the individual zoo and the zoo industry as a whole. It, of course, it is an industry, it is a revenue generating business, as well as it has to do a major role in conserving our animals. Now the a conservation effort will not run unless the public is interested in conserving the animal. So the zoo has another important job to make sure that the public loves the animal, and not that if you go to a zoo you will be getting a disease. So that is the importance of biosecurity and the zoo industry, or the industry as such, and thus assisting in acquiring and managing the exotic species. So that concludes the basics regarding zoo hygiene. Thank you.